Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. In today's show, we'll continue our look into India's ongoing foreign interference into Canadian politics and the online petition demanding transparency of just who has been influenced by Modi's regime. Meanwhile, in the UK, a leading Sikh MP asks yet again, where is our promised inquiry into Britain's involvement in 1984? And in the US, the Sikh Coalition updates its policy priorities that will dictate the direction of its lobbying of the new incoming Trump regime. Well, all this and more in today's show. And joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Thanks for all the great comments and just keep them rolling in. We love reading them.
Indeed we do, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world, and we will indeed be taking a look at loads of great comments at the end of the show, so thank you for those. Right, James, let's get the show on the road. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, today I'm going to spend a little time on foreign interference. I know it's a surprise. Who would ever think that India might be involved in something like that, especially when it comes to Canadian politics, the potential for a new leader in the Liberal Party, and of course a new Prime Minister later in the year. So with that said, of course, we know that foreign interference has been an issue that we have seen in the Conservative leadership race, as well as other leaders throughout Canada in the past two elections. Well, we know it's been going on forever, but very predominantly in the last two elections here in Canada and elsewhere in the world. Now, what's ironic is that the India media is, well, at very least it gave me a little chuckle because, boy, did they ever come out with reports pushing a narrative that it's all China and the ISI that are interfering in Canadian politics, and that the Liberals are trying to fix the election as they have in the past by allowing people with their permanent residency to vote when they have not been naturalized citizens. So let's first take a look at a video that the India media is putting out, and again, you'll see why I got a laugh out of it when it came to their narrative of it being the Chinese.
We start with a big story, ladies and gentlemen. And viewers, this is coming in with respect to Canada, the Liberal Party, and the threat of foreign interference. Our Security Affairs editor Manoj Kumar Gupta getting us the story. The Liberal Party leadership vote is on the 9th of March to pick Trudeau's successor. The vote is under Canadian Intelligence Agency's scanner because Canada's Elections Intelligence Task Force of the CSIS and the RCMP, they will be keeping a very close watch on the Liberal Party leadership vote on the 9th of March. The reason? The Liberal Party is actually asking PR holders to vote for them. It's an attempt to bring in voters conveniently who are not actually naturalized Canadians yet. The Liberals are allowing permanent resident PR holders, that means holders of passport of another nation who may still have voting rights in another nation, they are allowing them permission to come in and vote within the Liberal Party race for the next leader. Now, that's a huge concern. Terry Mileski, author, and Dr. Anand Ranganathan, author and analyst, should be joining us in a bit. There is more to this story. Top intelligence sources have also told your channel that foreign interference in Canada's elections has always been a concern. China's involvement was very visible, and according to Canadian intelligence CSIS, China actually attempted to interfere in the 2019 and 2021 Canadian elections. China's tactics allegedly included disinformation campaigns, donations to support preferred candidates. The Chinese also directed international students to work for specific candidates. Their goal was to ensure the Liberal Party's victory, but with only a minority government. Now, Han Dong, a Liberal MP, was accused of being part of a Chinese foreign interference network, but later confessed to use Chinese students in Canada to work for him. Vincent Kay, member of the Provincial Parliament, Ontario, was accused of serving as a financial intermediary for the Chinese consulate. He denied the allegations but later resigned from his role as parliamentary secretary. There are also concerns that the Conservative Party has softened its stance on China since 2021 election, potentially due to foreign interference. There are concerns that a number of ISI-backed candidates will be influencing the elections. Canadian political parties having a faulty leadership selection system and the wrong practices are some of the other big concerns that need to be addressed. Dr. Anand Ranganathan joins us.
So, I mean, where do you start with that? The drama music. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And in fact, one of the other things that I just got a real chuckle out of, Angus, was that they're talking about the ISI candidates. They are talking about the Chinese. They've got the dramatized music. They have the graphics and the breaking news. But they did not say a word about the BJP, about Modi, about anything else. And then they go on to say that that they used the foreign students and the PR individuals and they fix the election, but they only wanted the Liberals to have a minority government. I mean, where does that make sense? If you're going to fix an election, you want a majority government. So it's just ridiculous. And the fact that, of course, that just also proves that they can get specialists and all of these professionals to come on this show as these pundits that are the experts in the field and just really continue to spread disinformation in themselves. And again, this is a narrative that's coming out of India very strongly and fits all of the descriptors when it comes to what to watch for when it comes to false information and foreign interference. So it's just laughable at what they are doing there. Now, of course, we know that there is serious concerns, and yes, China is a bad actor when it comes to foreign interference in Canada with the elections. So is Russia, so is Iran, so are many other countries. But I don't believe that there is such a big threat as there is coming out of India. And that has actually been identified by Canada and by the inquiry into foreign interference. Now, coming up on January 31st is the deadline for the Foreign Interference Inquiry Report to be released to government. That does not, however, mean that it'll be released to the public at that time. It could be redacted in sections. It could be withheld, especially with the uncertainty as to where we are heading with the new federal leader for the Liberals and the new PM, as well as the looming elections. So there's no guarantee that that information is going to be coming out before an election. And that's where we'll talk in a moment about a petition online to really encourage Canadians to get behind forcing or at least pressuring the Canadian government to get the names of MPs and other staffers out there in the public and to release them so we know going into an election who are the bad actors, who are they that are involved with foreign interference, whether it's on behalf of the Chinese government, whether it's on behalf of the the India government or any others. So that's an important thing that we'll touch on in just a moment. Now, of course, the foreign interference, the election will be very closely watched this year, and that is really a big concern. But there's not going to be a lot of policy shift or changes made at Elections Canada or at the parliamentary level before the election happens. And that, of course, is a concern because we would expect that they would make some type of recommendations. But again, it's going to be such a short window between the time that the report is issued to Parliament and then, of course, the leadership race for the Liberals and then the election itself. So there's a short window to make any adjustments. But again, they need to really crack down on this foreign interference. Now, we've seen this chart before that I've got up on the screen, and this goes to show who exactly is looking at the foreign interference in the Canadian election process. And that, of course, has different responsibilities and different roles by different agencies. So as you can see, CSIS, which is the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and they are looking to look at the threat reduction and intelligence on the bad actors, as well as watching the overseas activities that are going on. And we know that Angus and I, we speak all the time about the hundreds of millions of dollars that the India government puts out in or spends on misinformation and bad information. So again, there is CSIS that's involved in that. When it comes to the information technology security for the government itself, there is the Communication Security Establishment. And if there are people out there working within the elections, or even if you are a business owner and are concerned about your cybersecurity in Canada, and you can always go to cyber.gc.ca, and that is a great government resource that helps to understand cybersecurity and cyber risks. And then, of course, we have the RCMP, and they are more looking at what's happening on Canadian soil, but they do, of course, have officers and offices around the world that keep an eye on what's going on at that level of interference, as well as investigating individual cases that may come to light when it comes to foreign interference. Now, of course, we have this big concern in Canada, given that we know there are bad actors and that there has been a history of foreign interference, but especially when it comes to that big report that we are anticipating will be released to the public shortly thereafter, it being produced and reviewed by Parliament. But with Parliament essentially shut down right now, that may be a roadblock to the public access to this information. And that's why I've personally started a petition online that you can see on your screen here. And that is to put pressure on the Canadian government, on the federal Elections Canada and Parliament itself to start releasing those names. As a voter in Canada, as a Canadian citizen, we should all be very concerned about where we are at in this election cycle, in this democratic process, and to ensure that we get those names of potential bad actors before the next election, not after, because by that time it will be too late to make any difference in that election. And I think that over the next 4 or 5 years, we really are going to need a credible and trustworthy group of people in office, as far as you can get with politicians anyway. So again, we need to make sure that the information is released, that we have access to it, and we know who is serving a master overseas as opposed to who's actually looking for the best interests and future for Canada. Now, once again, Modi and his RSS and the Hindutva, they are going to be trying like crazy to influence what's going on here, and it's up to us to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, with that said, there are different ways that Canadians can be involved in watching out and being aware of foreign interference. And first of all, let's take a look at the reality of the claims that PRs are going to be voting. And right here, it is the under Elections Canada shows clearly that you are not eligible to vote in Canada unless you are a citizen, unless you are 18 years old on election day, and you must prove your identity and your residential address. So these are just the highlights of the requirements, but very clearly you need to be a citizen. And that just, you need to take your identification. You need to make sure that you can prove it. You don't just go there and tell them and they take your word for it and send you on your way to a voting booth. It must be clearly demonstrated that you are a Canadian citizen. So again, just the misinformation on what the India media media is reporting about the Liberal Party is false. And again, it's just ridiculous that they claim that China and the ISI were involved in in foreign interference, but only wanted the Liberals to win by a minority, not a majority vote. So that was just ridiculous in itself. But in any event, we can go down here, and how threat actors are targeting elections is they want to do a variety of different things. And this comes directly from the Government of Canada and the Security of Elections. And that is they want to disrupt the election infrastructure using distributed denial of service attacks. They want to compromise or mimic user identities to spread disinformation on social media or perpetrate voter fraud. They want to exploit remote work environments to compromise systems and gain unauthorized access to election management or political party systems. They want to launch online foreign influence campaigns to discredit the democratic process, which we've just seen a beautiful example of. They will use ransomware-based attacks to disrupt the access to election data and systems leading to interruption of election services. So, of course, by delaying or shutting down polling stations, they could make that happen. So, again, that's just something else that is definitely a threat. They want to generate synthetic content using artificial intelligence to covertly manipulate information online and influence voter opinions or behaviors. And that's something as well that Angus and I have covered on the show many times, is the impact that artificial intelligence can have and these deep fakes when it comes to technology. It is becoming a bigger and bigger risk every day, and something that people really need to be aware of. Defining the disinformation versus malinformation and misinformation. The three different terms are used, and a lot of times they're interchangeable by most people's definition. But here is the clear definition of misinformation: is referring to false information that is not intended to cause harm. So it's just, typical people out there on the internet that just haven't a clue about the topics they're speaking of, but they don't mean to actually cause harm to anybody by that, and it probably wouldn't. Now, disinformation differs from that because that is intended to manipulate, cause damage, and guide people, organizations, and countries in the wrong direction. So that is what we see when we look at foreign governments, foreign agents, and other bad actors that represent different policies and different direction that they want to see in the world. Now, malinformation refers to information that stems from the truth but is often exaggerated in a way that misleads and causes a potential harm. So again, that is more exaggerated and manipulated information as opposed to just straight out false information. So that's just a quick definition between the three when you hear those terms. Now, we'll just wrap this part up with looking at different ways to identify the false information, the misinformation, and the disinformation. So does it provoke an emotional response? Does it make a bold statement on a controversial issue? Is it extraordinary claim? Does it contain clickbait? Does it use small piece of valid information that is exaggerated or extorted? Again, just to ask yourself these questions when you are seeing reports such as the one we showed at the top of this story as a very clear example. And by any account, it is not as simple or as clear in all cases as that video was. That was very, very clearly misinformation, disinformation, and everything else combined. So again, if you want to sign the petition, you can scan this QR code on your computer screen, or you can just go to the link right there, and you can sign the petition as a Canadian citizen. If you are not a Canadian citizen, unfortunately, it won't do any good to sign it, so it would be best if you don't as a non-Canadian citizen, just because then it just takes away from the impact of the petition in itself when it makes its way to the House of Commons and to the Parliament. So once again, as we approach the federal election, Please use common sense. Please use your brain to go in and research the parties, the candidates, and any information that you are reading or seeing online. We know that it is such a huge issue, and although there are many safeguards in place for this election, we know that there are even bigger threats and new technology that might be able to subvert what is there to protect us. So again, that not only goes for Canada, but it is great information regardless as to where you are in the world to watch out and be aware of all of this manipulation and foreign interference, Angus.
Yes, I think it just highlights the enormous task that any democracy faces to ensure free and fair elections. We take it for granted here in the West that we just assume naturally, of course, our elections are on the whole pretty free and fair. In reality, when you dig beneath the surface, of course, there are all sorts of bad actors, malign interests who are trying to interfere with that process. And of course, we've traditionally known about Russia and China, and that's reached mainstream news headlines for many years. The attempted foreign interference from I would say the traditional enemies. Certainly the traditional enemy going back to the Cold War was Russia, and then more recently with China. But of course we have this new entrant into this field, of course, is India. And again, India has obviously been interfering for quite some time at a very relatively low level. But its interference, certainly since 2014 and the rise of the BJP in the electoral system in India, that interference has really ramped up and has become so significant it's actually hitting mainstream news now. And it's also starting to impact the policy-making decisions of not just governments, but of course their law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. They're now having to devote actual time and resources to tackling not only China and Russia's interference, but now India's interference. There's no ambiguity there. It is happening. They've identified it. These inquiries have uncovered it. So it's such a big area, and it covers so many different nuances. As I say, on the face of it, we'll take for granted our democracy, but when you do look in detail at just what is going on below the surface, it's quite concerning. And let's just quickly jump to the video clip that you showed there, James. And we have a typical Indian news outlet. It is a Godi news outlet. It's spouting the Modi narrative, the BJP narrative, and of course it always has its agenda. It's pro-Modi. It's anti anything that stands up against the Hindutva RSS alliance, and of course the Brahmanical rule of India. So, but it does pick on Canada rather a lot, and particularly obviously since Trudeau stood up last year. And in fact, actually more than last year. It was 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago.
Almost.
Gosh, how time flies. And but it's picking on Canada rather disproportionately. And one has to sort of really ask the question: why on earth is India, one of the rising nations, one of the rising superpowers of the world, picking on what is, I suppose, relatively speaking, with all due respect to Canada, a relatively small nation? And it is actually, I think it speaks volumes for what Canada stands for, and it speaks volumes about the Sikh community once again. Because, as I've often said, why on earth are the ruling elite of India, and by that read obviously the RSS and the Brahmanical elite of India, why are they so obsessed with the Sikh community? Why are they so obsessed about Khalistan? Disproportionately so, because of course the Sikh community is tiny in relation to the overall population, the demographics of India. And likewise the massively dominant control that the RSS have over Indian politics, and of course the complete and utter social control that the Brahmins have over Indian society. So why on earth does this tiny community have such an obsessive agenda on the part of the RSS? And likewise, then by extension, Canada. I think this actually speaks volumes why India is obsessed with Canadian politics. It is because there is this large Sikh diaspora in Canada, and again, it just proves, and once again, it underlines that there is this obsessive agenda of India to tackle the Sikh problem as they see it, to tackle the Khalistan movement, and to tackle the Sikh community. It seems almost unbelievable that such a large nation would be so fearful, terrified, obsessed with such a small community, but it is. And once again, this is the evidence. India isn't really interested in Canadian politics. It's really only interested in the Sikh community. That's who the ultimate target is. And of course, Canadian politics is its tool to tackle the diaspora, the Sikh diaspora in Canada. It's madness, isn't it, really, when you take a step back and you think it's crazy. But this is what we're dealing with India. They are so obsessed with the Sikh community. So as a result, they are expending hundreds of millions of dollars every year. They are interfering in Canadian politics. They are putting their own place people in academia, in politics. They're actually incentivizing various agents and proxies in North America and particularly Canada, again with this same goal in mind. It's to keep a lid on the Sikh diaspora. Again, that is what they're obsessed about. It's absolutely hilarious. And I have to say, for the Sikh community, even though you obviously feel persecuted by this, actually be complimented by this. This is an enormous compliment to the power, the reach and the effectiveness of the Sikh community. If you have got the Brahmins, this enormous nation on earth, the most populous nation on earth, is so obsessively paranoid about the Sikh community, that proves in simple terms just how effective the lobbying of the Sikh community is. So that's one lesson to take from all this. Also very interesting from that video clip, again, we were both chuckling at it because not only does it make great entertainment, it's not news, it's entertainment. It's almost like a fun magazine show when you watch these things. As you say, it's very dramatic, the music, it's lots of rhetoric. But ultimately, it's spreading a nonsense narrative. It's spreading the narrative of the BJP. But what I did find particularly amusing about this is they are on the face of it, paranoid, terrified about China, Chinese interference in Canadian politics. How dare China do this? Well, we do know China does this, and they do it not just in Canada, they do it across all Western nations. They certainly do it here in the UK. I've seen it firsthand. So we do know China's done it. Russia's done it. That has almost been taken as read. But what I find particularly hilarious in this is that India is accusing China of doing it when India is actually using it as its own model. India has followed China's example almost to the letter. They are using it as a template on how to interfere in Canadian politics. So whilst they're accusing China of this, we're actually saying thank you very much, China, because we're doing the same. We'll just copy exactly what you're doing because clearly it's effective. But of course they don't raise that in their news outlets, which I do find actually quite funny. So I think that in itself is quite a sadly amusing and hypocritical indictment of India's actions in the matter. We talk about PR, this allowing foreign nationals the vote in the Liberal leadership elections. Well, again, India's unhappy about this, and actually I think many Canadians will be unhappy about this. In fact, funnily enough, we've had the same debate here in the UK. It is a debate that's happening currently in the UK as well. Should foreign nationals be allowed to have the vote? Because of course that means they have an influence, albeit small, but they have an influence on a nation's democratic process and democratic systems, and by extension by policy making. Well, if an individual actually has another nation's interests in their mind, they shouldn't be allowed to vote in a nation's democratic process. It's basic logic. So in that, they are absolutely right, but it's interesting that they then hold China up against this, because likewise, the argument is immediately, as we have been doing, turning it against India, saying why should anybody coming from India who doesn't have Canadian citizenship have any involvement, never mind a vote, any involvement in policy making in Canada's democracy? Likewise, Chandra Araya, we talk about him recently arriving. He was in his 40s when he arrived in Canada. And again, we've raised the question, well, what on earth? Why should he even be allowed to be an MP? The question has to be raised. Now, certainly, I would hold anybody's ethnicity, race, background, nationality, whatever. I would never hold them against them as long as they're good enough to do their job. But when it comes to democracy and standing up constitutionally, then they have to be absolutely crystally transparently clear that their entire interests and their whole motivation and agenda is in the interests of their host nation. There can be absolutely no ambiguity in that. Where there is ambiguity, it must be prevented, because then therefore you start diluting and undermining the democracy of that nation. So I think certainly that there is a huge argument to ensure that nobody who is not a citizen of a nation should be allowed to vote in any way, shape or form. They are very welcome to stay in that nation and enjoy that nation's benefits, but they should not be allowed to influence its policy making. If they do, they should then naturalise and become citizens of that country. And then I think the final note here is really, I think, again, reverting back to the Indian media talking about this, and of course this, well, it's not an obsession, but certainly this, the laying blame on China. And I think this just does raise, again, a larger geopolitical question about the dynamics at play here and how complex and nuanced they are. Because we've often talked about the India-China relationship, and in the past it's been quite tense, fractious, difficult, so choose your euphemism of choice there. But certainly they are two rising superpowers and they are two rival superpowers. However, there is at the same time a sort of, I would say, an uncomfortable alliance between the two. We've talked about the BRICS economies. They are both, of course, members of the BRICS economies. They sit in alignment with Russia. They sit in alliance with Russia to a large degree. So, of course, Russia is almost a peace broker between these two nations. And one has to worry if there is any closer alignment to China, because, of course, China is a potential enemy of the West for all the reasons that we talk about regularly. And it is, of course, a very close ally to Russia. But India, we need India on side, and we've often said this, that we don't want India as an enemy. It is a powerful nation. It is a nation of which we have enormous historic ties with, certainly here in the UK. We always see it as a friend, a potential ally, and well, from a personal perspective, I've always loved India and the Indian people, and I would be very unhappy to see it go in the wrong direction, away from a friendly relationship and an alliance with Western nations. So we certainly want to keep India on side, particularly from a geopolitical perspective. But when we see it ever align with China, that is when we need to get worried, and that is when we need to do everything we can from our side, from the Western side I'm talking about, to break that relationship between China and India. And so I think one sort of weird upside of all this is if India are publicly standing up against China, at least in this context. Again, but it's a sign again of India always plays both sides and plays both sides against each other. India always acts in its own interest, but ultimately, as we often say, India is one day going to have to choose sides. Which side is India on? Is it going to be on the side of Western democratic nations, the rule of law, or is it going to choose to side with totalitarian regimes, communist regimes, the likes of Russia and China and Iran, etc.? Is that where it really wants to be? I don't know. So there's a lot of topics in this one, James. It's a very complex and interesting area to discuss.
And I don't think it's something that's going to go away with this election cycle. I don't think that this report is going to be a tell-all, fix-all. But just a couple of other points to keep in mind. Again, that Russia has been replaced as the number 2 threat against Canada when it comes to foreign interference. And of course, India is now in that number 2 place, a list that most nations don't want to climb. But India seems to be quite proud of the fact that they're climbing the ladder of being the major player of foreign interference in the world. And with that, I mean, we know that Canada and India relations are not at the best level. They are probably at one of the lowest points they've been in decades. And that has pushed Canadian trade talks further with China. There are trade talks that are increasing not only with the rift between Canada and India, but also with the threat of tariffs in the U.S. That has spurred Canada to start talking more with China about some trade agreements that are, in the works. And that may cost the U.S. economy as well, because we are going to be pushing away from such a major reliance. I mean, they're the number 1 trade partner for Canada. And now we have to look at diversification with our markets to make sure that if the tariffs come in, then we still protect Canadians and Canadian jobs. And that, again, is also going to be an Achilles heel for those who are working to circumvent Canadian elections and to get that misinformation out there. Because, again, it's going to make a tough time and a tough transition for Canadians. When that happens, they are more susceptible to believing the BS that's fed to them by these foreign actors, Angus.
Indeed, a lot of dynamics at play there. So
That's
Yeah,
right.
and of course the petition there, I would urge our audience, if you're in Canada, you're a Canadian citizen, do look up that petition and get your signature on it, and spread the word. Spread the word. Let's get the numbers mounting on that petition. Let's see if we can get it viral as well. Okay, let's move on to a couple of stories I wanted to cover today, and I'm going to just jump across the Atlantic to here in the UK and our politics here. We had, in our last elections last July, we had a very successful election for obviously the Labour Party, but particularly for the Sikh community. We had 12 Sikh MPs entered Parliament to join or 10 to join the existing two, Tamnajit Desai and Preet Kaur Gill, who were already resident in the Houses of Parliament. And one of the longest serving Sikh MPs, Tan Desai, stood up in Parliament a couple of days ago, and he has been a good campaigner for the community, and of course many of the issues that affect the community. And of course one of the big issues that we've often talked about here is what happened in 1984 Operation Bluestar. And here in the UK, it was very evident, and as was subsequently uncovered, that Britain, the United Kingdom, did have some level of involvement in Operation Bluestar, that attack on the Golden Temple, the Ahmadiyya Sahib. And but what's really not been known is to what degree were we involved in our armed forces. And it was only a few years ago, almost by accident as it turned out, that the activist campaigners within the community uncovered some very interesting documents that reveal the fact that the British SAS were, it seems, consulted by India, by the Indian government and presumably by the Indian military forces. They were consulted, our special forces here in the UK were consulted prior to that attack for their opinions and their input into this attack. That's all we know. What happened was we have a 30-year rule here in the UK as a generalisation where government documents are sealed for at least 30 years. There are changes and it can be extended under certain circumstances, but as a generalisation, government documents are sealed for 30 years, and then after 30 years they are released to the public. The belief is that obviously there is a time is of the essence imperative here, where documents are sensitive, can affect living people, can affect prevailing conditions if they are released, so they are kept secret until at a time when it is generally believed that the world's moved on and actually their impact will be just more of historical interest than anything else. So we have this 30-year rule. Right. But of course many issues do continue, and of course 1984 is an issue that will not go away, and certainly the Sikh community will never let it lie. They will never forget this. And it's very interesting that 30 years after 1984, in 2014, the 30-year rule released some documents, and it happened almost under the radar. It was almost accidental. They were released. Now, what often happens in these cases is that these documents, when government archivists, or whatever you want to call it, and those with a vested interest, they normally keep an eye on what is released, and if they think there's something a little bit controversial that is still relevant to today, they will then, I don't know the precise details or the protocols, but in essence what they do is they apply for an extension, and it's usually granted by, I guess, a judge or whoever is legally involved in this, and they will grant an extension for however long it may be. There are some documents that are 50 years, there are some documents that are even 70 years, COVID being an example of this, interestingly. And so some documents are extended. They're hidden from view for an extended period. But anyway, but when this happened in 2014, many of the documents relating to the British involvement in 1984 were released. Now, they were actually redacted. That means lots of areas were actually blacked out, so you couldn't read it. But enough was released that activists in the Sikh community got their hands on these documents, and they pored over them, and they discovered that the SAS were involved, or at least to some degree were involved in maybe a consultancy basis in 1984. This caused an absolute furore, saying, why didn't we know this? This is absolutely outrageous. And of course, the Sikh community were outraged, justifiably so. And since that date, there has been a movement within the Sikh community to say we must have a full inquiry. And in fact, interestingly, I think those documents that were then released were then were dragged back, and they were removed from the public domain again. In other words, there is a lot more to hide. There is a lot more still buried. In other words, the British government is hiding something. They do not want these documents to be released, and they certainly don't want them to be released in full. That's why they redacted the originals to start with. So, as a result, campaigners in the community have been demanding since 1984 to know what the British government have been up to. And interestingly, the current Labour government, Starmer's government, made a promise, a pledge, before becoming the government, that they would launch an inquiry into 1984, a judge-led inquiry, which means that it would have the legal power to release all those documents, to investigate all those documents, to read everything that has been hidden away about what happened in 1984 and the British involvement. That could be potentially explosive. That is why we want an inquiry. So, I'm saying all this to give you a bit of context now. Tan Desai, one of our longest serving Sikh MPs here in the UK, has been campaigning for this, and he stood up in Parliament 2 days ago to make the following speech. I'll just play it for you.
So in its pursuit for the truth and transparency, the British Sikh community duly launched a campaign for an independent inquiry to establish the extent of that involvement. In 1984, the global Sikh community suffered catastrophic collective trauma when the then Indian government ordered the storming of the Golden Temple complex in Amritsar, which led to devastating destruction and bloodshed, with thousands of innocent people losing their lives. 30 years later, to our shock, new documents exposed that the Thatcher government had helped their Indian counterparts by providing advice prior to that military operation. So in its pursuit for the truth and transparency, the British Sikh community duly launched a campaign for an independent inquiry to establish the extent of that involvement. Leader of the House, while previous Conservative governments have tried to brush the issue under the carpet, Sikhs expected the new Labour government to establish that promised independent inquiry. So, Leader of the House, when will that independent inquiry be initiated?
Leader of the House. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this matter? I know it is of great importance to the Sikh community across the UK, and he's absolutely right to raise it here today and to continue to raise it on behalf of the Sikh community and others. We do need to get to the bottom of what happened, and I will ensure that ministers responsible are in touch with him to discuss this matter further.
Blah, blah, blah. Haven't we heard this before? Yes, we heard it from 14 years of Conservative government, and we're hearing it from the prevailing Labour government. Now, what is appalling about this is that Keir Starmer himself, Angela Rayner, the deputy leader of the party herself, promised, yes, in opposition when they were campaigning they were campaigning to be elected to be government, they said, yes, of course, we will launch a public inquiry, a judge-led inquiry into the events of 1984 and British involvement. Well, they've been in government now since July last year. That's 6 months and a bit. And it has still not been mentioned. It's taken Tan Desai once again to stand up in Parliament and say, well, where is this inquiry that you've promised us? Where is it? I've certainly seen no action being taken towards it. And what's he receiving from the government spokesperson? Well, don't worry about it. We're on it. We'll be in touch. Yeah, we've heard all that before. We had it for 14 years from the Conservative government. We've been here before. So, and again, unfortunately, and when I was in Birmingham again last week, talking to many representatives from the community, we did talk about the Labour government, and I am sensing that the Sikh community, as a generalisation, probably supports the Labour Party more than any other party. So, the Labour Party does rely on potentially up to 1 million Sikh votes here in the UK. So it's a big part of their electoral demographic. And I am sensing now that the Sikh community is starting to align with my belief, and I've always been completely open about this. I think the Labour government is completely and utterly betraying the Sikh community. It's always intended to do so. It was only courting it for its votes. And ultimately, as I've always said, let's judge by results. Well, here we are 6 months in, and there isn't even discussion at a ministerial level about a judge-led inquiry into 1984. And of course, all the other issues we talk about, transnational repression, etc. Avtar Singh Kandar. I don't see much going on about Avtar Singh Kandar, etc., etc. In other words, I hate to say it, James, but once again, I think the Sikh community here in the UK is going to be betrayed. It is being betrayed, and it is going to be betrayed. Whether it's by the Conservative Party or whether it's by the Labour Party, they are all one and the the same as far as I'm concerned. We are, of course, James, you and I, as we've often said, we are no great fans of politicians. I think we all have our very clearly stated opinions of politicians on all sides and all brands and colours. And I'm sad to say that once again, here we are again, James. I think I just feel another betrayal underway.
Well, first, Angus, I'd like to say that the Parliament there didn't look as good as it did when we last looked at it and saw you sitting in there. So, But absolutely. I mean, the politicians are always making these promises and, you take it for what it's worth. You consider the source, and unfortunately, it's not very reliable. It's like the old saying, the check is in the mail. For our younger audience, that was a piece of paper you'd sign. Forget it. Go back to scrolling. But in any event, yeah, it's the same old with the same non-results, we'll say, Angus.
Indeed. So, of course, we're going to keep on top of this story, and I'm sure Tan is going to keep that pressure on. He's not going to let this lie, and I think Starmer's going to have to realise that they just can't keep ignoring this issue. They are going to have to give it their attention, because otherwise they're just going to lose the Sikh community. That's 1 million votes, and there's no politician in his right mind or her right mind going to allow the loss of 1 million votes. So. To our British Sikh audience, keep that pressure on. Do not let this go. You've got to keep pressuring your local MPs, whoever that may be, to keep pressuring the ministers and indeed, of course, Keir Starmer himself about this. We must not let this lie. So, okay, let's move on to my second story. Again, let's jump back across the Atlantic to North America. And the Sikh Coalition in the United States has been a fantastic organisation to represent Sikh issues and the Sikh community in North America, but particularly in the United States. And they've updated a document that they first unveiled in 2020. This is, in fact, it's the North American or the US equivalent of what we had here in the UK, that the Sikh Federation released here in the UK, the Sikh Manifesto, which has been a very successful document designed to set out the policies and the issues of the community that would then be lobbied for against the British politicians. And so the US has its equivalent. The Sikh Coalition launched their equivalent, which they called Combating Bias, Bigotry and Backlash, Sikh American Civil Rights Policy Priorities. And it is quite a lengthy document that sets out the federal policy guide, setting out all the issues that they want to raise with the US government. And as they say, and I'll just quickly read what they how they introduce this document. And they said, as we move to engage the 119th Congress, and of course the Trump administration coming in, the Sikh Coalition seeks to ensure that the civil rights priorities for our community remain at the forefront of the national conversation. Sikh American Policy Priorities articulates the core areas of the Sikh Coalition's federal policy work, including hate crime, transnational repression, etc., etc. I'll go through them in detail, or at least summarise what the areas that this will cover. Each section describes why the Sikh Coalition works in a given area and how the policy goals serve our and our other communities. Then the document presents specific recommendations about specific legislation that they will be lobbying for and the action of the agenda to ensure that legislation is enacted. And they say that they sign off this introduction really with a very important element here. They say, as always, the Sikh Coalition urges you to practice your faith fearlessly. And this is really this is the real root of what this is all about. Because, of course, in a democracy, as we often say, you must be allowed to practice your freedom of speech, your freedom of religious practice without fear. And that's really what this is about. This document is titled Combating Bias, Bigotry and Backlash. In other words, we must all, whatever our backgrounds, whatever our religions, we must be free to enact and act out our religious practices without any fear. And this is why we have a problem with India, because of course many Sikhs fear to go out in public. They fear to go about their daily activities because of this transnational oppression. This is why this is so important. And of course this targets two particular areas. Of course there is a transnational oppression, and of course there's just the basic hate crimes, this racism, bigotry, whatever, that unfortunately does exist in society around the world, really. It's not just a Western problem. So I just want to quickly just go through this document, and it is headed Combating Bias, Bigotry and Backlash, Sikh American Policy Priorities, and it is, yes indeed, the fourth edition since 2020. So it is regularly updated, of course, as legislation does evolve. And it goes through various elements. Of course, it does introduce the Sikh community, and it does say Sikhism, also known as Sikhi, is the world's 5th largest organised world religion. In other words, we're here to stay. And it says there are 27 million Sikhs around the world. Most live in Punjab, but there are roughly 750,000 Sikhs in the United States. So it is a very large population within the United States. So it heads up saying we are aiming to prevent, address and track hate crimes. This, of course, is a very important area. Most hate crimes are not reported, and this is why actually there has to be a lot of action against this, because the policymakers, the government itself, can't do anything about it if they don't know how big the problem is. So a lot of this is aimed around, firstly, identifying what exactly is a hate crime, and then how to report it, and then what actions can then be taken to tackle and deal with those hate crimes. It then goes on to, and again, a big area of this, of course, to mitigate and deter transnational oppression. Strangely enough, of course, the map it refers to there is, of course, India. That is where, of course, the transnational oppression is coming from. It's a huge area, and they of course, have a lot of recommendations around this area, and these are areas that we talked about in great deal, particularly with the evolving and, I have to say, very successful activities of a core group of congressmen and women who are acting on behalf of the Sikh community, introducing all sorts of very powerful transnational repression legislation, and we've covered that in a lot of detail. To stop employment discrimination, and of course this is something that the Sikh community does suffer, unfortunately. Interestingly as well, the caste system. This isn't just the Sikh community, and of course the policies that are being lobbied by the Sikh community do also benefit minorities of other ethnicities. And interestingly, of course, it benefits Hindus. Why? Because yes, the caste system is still alive and well in North America. Again, we've talked and covered this on many occasions. The caste system is being extended, this evil system perpetuated by the Brahmanical controllers of India, because of course they sit on the top of this caste system. The caste system is alive and well in North America, and a lot of this lobbying by the Sikh community, yes, once again, it's the Sikh community standing up against this. Why, of course, they are, as we talked earlier, why they are such a target of India is because it's the Sikh community trying to prevent the perpetuation of the caste system around the world, and of course, certainly in North America.
That's right.
To create safe and inclusive schools. Again, the Sikh community has had massive impact in this, in the educational system in North America. I think, is it 20 plus states now are now introducing Sikhi into the national curriculum, and the aim is to spread that across all 52 states of the United States. And next area is to end profiling and reform policing. Again, we've talked quite often about problems that we've had in law enforcement in the United States. It's not just particular to the US, it does happen in other nations, not least India, as we talked about, I think, even yesterday. But this is covering many areas, but it does include, for example, educating law enforcement about the carrying of the kirpan. Yes, we had that taxi driver in New York who was stopped and arrested by, I think it was at the airport, for carrying his kirpan. So it's many areas that include things like that, for example, that they will lobby for education of law enforcement in that. To support humane immigration policies, I think that really speaks for itself. Immigration, of course, a very hot topic, particularly with the incoming Trump administration and the war. And to increase Sikh awareness and representation. This is a very important one. And again, this is a message to the audience as well, very much amongst the community, is you have an impact. Even your small voice as an individual does have an impact, because it's the combination of voices. It's those who go out there at the grassroots, who campaign, who lobby, who pressure the next layer above you. It's your local representatives, your local members of parliament, your local congressmen, your local congresswomen. Get them aware of what the issues are, because when you go out there with your khalistan flag, your turban, whatever it is that you are visualizing your Sikhi culture and identity, that does have an impact. The more of us that get together out there and speak out about the issues, the more you are raising awareness that does in turn impact the higher levels of the political hierarchy, and that in turn impacts government policy. So it really does, as we often said, getting out there in the streets genuinely does make a difference. It has an impact. So again, it's increasing Sikh awareness and representation. Of course, very relevant to what we've been talking about, James, reinforcing democracy at home. Well, there's not much more to say about that. But ultimately, what we're all here for, and even why Satellite TV exists, is we are trying to reinforce the rule of law. We are trying to enforce the spread of the truth, to counter the narratives spreading out of India, not just India, but of course anywhere else. But it's all about truth. And democracy is built on the rule of law. It is built on accountability, and most importantly, it is built on the perpetuation of the truth, James. That's what it's all about. I think this document is a very powerful document, and I do urge you, it makes interesting reading. It is quite dry in parts. It's obviously about legislation and fairly boring bits about that, but its impact is very, very important. But what it does represent, and this is really the message of all this, is it represents the Sikh community's voice getting represented in government level. It's ensuring that the government is firstly aware of what impacts the Sikh community, what is important to the Sikh community, but more importantly, it means that they can then enact legislation to benefit the Sikh community. That's what this is all about, James.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many takeaways that can be brought forward into Canada, the UK. It doesn't just apply to America. So that's another benefit too, for people to read it from all different parts of the world and to really take to heart the message that is there. And that is to offer that sense of security, to Sikhs all over the world, in the US, in Canada, in the UK, but again, to force the politicians to take the issue seriously and to give fair representation to all communities that fall under that flag, whatever country flag that is. So, again, and you look at safe schools, you look at, more awareness and education for police officers. All of these things are key subjects. And I think that no matter where those pressures are coming from and that information is coming from, it only works to bring a community forward, make them stronger, and create a better future for all citizens.
Absolutely. Very wise words, James. But talking of politicians, I want to move on to our comments section, where Mr. Araya has had an absolute hammering, I'm delighted to say. I think it's pretty evident from our own audience, their feelings and opinions of Mr. Chandra Araya's attempt to take over Trudeau's position as leader of the Liberal Party. We'll start with, let me check. He says, Chandra Araya is an Indian proxy. Yeah, I think he is. I don't think we can deny that. And if he wins, then it means Indian government agencies are deeply rooted in the Canadian system, and this will be unfortunate for Canada. I think, James, in reality, I think Indian government agencies are already deeply rooted in the Canadian system. I think we've often talked about certainly the embassies and the infrastructure, the ambassadorial infrastructure in Canada, not just in Canada, but certainly across the Western world, I'd say. They have become the staging post, the staging post for Indian intelligence to release their operatives and their operations, which have formed the backbone of the transnational repression operations. And I think it is believed that even Nijar's killing was really probably routed through, or at least channeled through, the embassy infrastructure within Canada, who in turn have used proxy criminals to undertake that killing. And so, yeah, James, I think, am I right in probably saying that the Indian infrastructure is already deeply embedded in Canada?
Absolutely, and it's not just India as well. I mean, look at the recent removal of individuals who are acting as agents for the government of China and operating actual police stations, Chinese police stations in Canada. And I think that as you touched on earlier, we'll see even more and more of India mimicking the actions of the Chinese as well when it comes to foreign interference and transnational repression, Angus.
Absolutely. And I think even the fact that Trudeau expelled a large number of Indian diplomats, I think even that just speaks volumes of how embedded this problem is in Canada, if he's had to resort to really the ultimate sanction, that is expelling diplomats. So, yeah, I think, let me check, I think you're absolutely bang on there. Achar Singhil says, goes a step further and thinks Chandra Araya is basically a Hindutva fascist. His ideas are so alien to Western democracies. I think you're absolutely right, James. I think he certainly represents Hindutva ideology, doesn't he?
Absolutely, and very old school concepts that just are not applicable to today's world.
Yeah, and I think even the term fascist, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this, and the word fascist is bandied around a bit too much these days, and certainly here in UK political discourse, the word fascist is always thrown around a little bit too liberally, and it's usually, I would say 99% of times, wrongly used. But actually, I think in this case, it is genuine. I don't know if Chandra Arai himself would actually genuinely be called a fascist, but certainly Hindutva in itself as an ideology is basically fascism, James. So I think it's not too big of a stretch to call Chandra Arai at least linked to fascism.
Absolutely.
Gurbachan Singh says, hi James and Angus, you're doing a great job. Well, thank you. We can only do it thanks to you and your comments, so thank you for that. Excuse me. Now, this is funny. Chandra, apparently, and again, my Punjabi is a bit rusty, but according to Gurbachan, he says Chandra in Punjabi culture is a person who is very selfish and with a very bad heart and mind. And if in Punjabi meet a person like him early in the morning, poor person will pray to God, please help me. I've just seen such a nasty face in the morning. So it's bad luck to even see a person like him. You're right, calling him very mean and a Scrooge person. I think it's a hilarious comment. This did make me chuckle.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it.
And I think we have an English term. It's called nominative determinism, which is an absolute mouthful, but it basically means your name can often determine your future. And I think if this is genuine, if Chandra does in Punjabi basically mean you're a very bad person, then unfortunately that is a classic case of nominative determinism. There's a word for our English learners. Try and practice that one. SSI saying just basis. Look, the guy's a joker. Awesome program. Thank you for that awesome comment. But yeah, I think he's basically a joker. I think he's a bit more than a joker. He's dangerous. This is the problem. He does have an influence. Yeah. He is an important guy. He has a position of relative power. So unfortunately, it goes beyond a joke. And this is actually why we must take it even more seriously, is because he's bidding for leadership. I personally don't think it's going to happen, James, but the fact is he still has influence in the party, and that in itself is bad enough. And he represents people. And again, that is bad news.
Absolutely. And just the fact that the general public, when they meet an MP or somebody's introduced as an MP, it gives a certain air of confidence about the person and a certain air of authority. And I think that in itself can be dangerous when it comes to Mr. Arya.
Yeah, and Hat B, another one of our regulars, says actually that he doesn't care about Sikh votes because, as in India, they're few compared to the Hindu majority that they appeal to for votes. And I think that actually this is true. Of course, the Indian diaspora in Canada, I actually don't know the numbers, but yes, I assume the Indian diaspora, the Hindu diaspora is probably bigger than the Sikh diaspora. Do you know that, James? I don't know the facts on that one, do you?
I don't, Angus.
Yeah, we'll have to look that up. But
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I think it's likely that in Canada, as probably here in the UK and in North America, I think the Hindu diaspora will probably outnumber the Sikh diaspora by a very large margin, which, he's more interested in that. He doesn't care about the Sikhs. Well, he cares about them because he doesn't like them to that extent, but he doesn't care about winning their votes. He doesn't need them because he's probably got enough Hindu votes. So I think you're absolutely right in that one. And then you mentioned Surinder's programme, and I have to say I didn't watch this because unfortunately, again, my Punjabi is not quite good enough to follow Surinder's programmes, but he showed how drugs are shipped into Punjab overnight from Gujarat. Yeah, wow. Unfortunately, I can't watch that. James and I really unfortunately can't watch that, but I'll ask Surinder about that and ask what evidence he has, because I think we've often talked about the drug problem in Punjab. If it's coming from Gujarat, oh, well, Gujarat, of course, does have a coast, and again, there's the Gujarat mafia, of which, well, clearly the BJP are heavily embedded there. Modi resides from there, as do many others, and of course the Bishnoi gang based in Gujarat as well. So, it wouldn't surprise me there. Pritam Korman says... Sorry, James.
Go ahead, that's fine.
Thanks. Pritam Korman says, when the others... we're talking about the 5Ks. When the others wear bangles, it's okay. Kara is not. When I travelled in 2008, they even removed a 1-inch kirpan from the suitcase and refused to allow us to leave India. This is, again, I find really concerning. Again, it's all about the 5Ks, the practice of being an Amrit Dari Sikh. And if you're wearing a turban, if you're wearing a kara, and of course the kirpan, the sword, it does, as it appears on regular occasions, and particularly in India, they are being increasingly targeted. But what I find baffling, James, is there have been stories about the bangle, the silver or steel bangle around the wrist that's worn, that Sikhs are being forced to remove it. Why on earth would they perceive a bangle as being a security threat? I cannot think how on earth that could be a specific security threat. Yes, in a metal detector, but it's pretty obvious what's being detected, but it's not a potential weapon, James.
Yeah, it just seems very odd, Angus. I mean, if they want to rescue people and prevent violence, take off the wedding ring.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. I think if somebody's wearing a wedding ring, which is no different other than size to wearing a kara, then, you know, again, it makes a mockery of the actual argument about it. So what it really points to, as clearly we indicate every time we talk about this story, it's deliberate persecution. It is deliberate persecution of the Sikh culture and identity, and is designed to, as I think I used the phrase the other day, it's designed to kill the community by 1,000 cuts. That's what it's all about. So, and Achal Singh Gill, again, refers to the actual constitution about this. And Achal says, look, it's actually written in the Indian constitution that a person of the Sikh faith can carry their kirpan. It's a deliberate repression and a lack of consideration in the way the officials are trained. Yeah, and absolutely. Now, one has to caveat this by saying, well, look, we can't be hypocritical. The Sikhs did not sign the Indian constitution. They were appalled by the constitution. They refused to sign it. So then we can't actually use it and say, well, look, it says in the constitution, because actually we don't agree with the constitution. So we can't have double standards there. Yeah, I think we've got to caveat our argument with that. But ultimately, okay, well, if the Hindus then and the BJP are standing by the constitution, well, yeah, you can't then stand by the constitution and say, look, or you've got to stand by the constitution. It does say that Sikhs can wear their articles of faith. So what, you can't then go against that constitution. As you say, it's a deliberate repression and a lack of consideration. And of course, the final part of your comment, it's a lack of training. I don't think this is a lack of training. It certainly is in the United States, and where it occurs here in the UK or the US or Canada, that is probably a lack of awareness. I don't think there's any malice of forethought in when it happens over here. But I think in India, it's not a lack of training. I think pretty much everybody on the Indian subcontinent will be aware of what Sikhs are about, and that their articles of faith include a kirpan, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And just to jump back for a quick second, I just pulled it up as you were talking there. In Canada, we have approximately 830,000 Hindus versus 771,000 Sikhs, according to the 2021 census. And so it actually is quite close overall, because I think that the Sikh community is definitely growing and expanding at a faster rate in Canada than the Hindu community. So
yeah, that's
just like throwing that out there.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Jez. Yeah, and actually that's quite interesting, because actually it's not an enormous majority. The numbers are quite close. So
that's right.
Yeah, I think the likes of Araya really maybe are not. Well, I think what it does highlight is the fact that he must therefore be acting for the RSS and the Hindutva ideology if he's being so anti-Sikh, because it's clearly the Sikh community is almost as big as the Hindu community, and therefore he should, if he was balanced, he would be courting the Sikh community, because there you go, there's over 1.5 million votes there at play, and instead he's deliberately alienated 750,000 Sikhs, which implies then, by logical definition, that he is acting on behalf of solely the Hindus, and therefore the RSS Hindutva ideology. So yeah, there, James, I think you've proven the point.
Yeah, and I mean, look at the hundreds of millions that the India government's spending on misinformation and and foreign interference. So he has that big value behind him in terms of the potential spend by the India government to influence it.
And I think there is only one answer to this, and I have to look to our final comment from Scythian Jat for this answer, and that is, well, look, please vote the Sikhs for Justice referendum. Khalistan Zindabad, James.
Yeah, that's right. Get out there and vote. The next vote is in March in Los Angeles. Let's hope that things calm down there, and our thoughts are still with those people impacted by the fires in Los Angeles at this time.
Indeed. So that is a great note to finish on the referendum itself. It is Khalistan Zindabad, and get out there and vote for hopefully Khalistan. We will make it a reality in the foreseeable future. But unfortunately, we must bring things to a close there for another day for Perspectives. Do keep those comments coming in. Thank you for all the comments that have been coming in. Do keep them coming in. Let us know your thoughts on things that we're discussing, the news items that we're covering. And of course, if there's anything you'd like us to discuss or that we may have missed, let us know in the comments below, or indeed message us directly at message@satlegetv.com. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. As always, it is a goodbye from me. It's a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.